It is truly a pleasure to be here today. It's always a pleasure to come and worship at Kailua United Methodist Church. But to be asked by the pastor to fill in for Samuel and I to come and take this morning, it's an honor. It's an honor and a blessing. Good to be with you all. A new beginning. That's what we called this message, and it seems very appropriate to do this on the first Sunday of the new year, as well as to have it be the Sunday of Epiphany. Epiphany. I've called my part of this Bringing God's Light to the World. I'm sharing with you a few things that came to me as I was in prayer, contemplating what I should share this morning. And then my husband, Samuel Cox, your former pastor, Sam Cox, will share his side. I woke up early this morning, and it was this morning. It was still dark outside, but out of my window, I was able to see some stars in the sky. From Kaneohe, we can't always do that. Lots of times we've got clouds, but there were stars in the sky. And I recognized the belt and the arms and the legs of a constellation that we call Orion. Orion. And I thought, wow, there is Orion. I can see him today. What came to my mind was 1991. I was newly arrived in Saipan. My children had all grown. My 6 kids were all on their own by then. And I had remarried and went with my husband, Jim Ripple. Some of you remember Jim Ripple. Went with my husband, Jim Ripple, to where he lived out in Saipan. Now, I had been living in Ohio, where I was born. I'd been raised in California, but I'd gone back to Ohio. I hadn't realized. I'd never been to the islands before. And I thought Hawaii back then was only a place where you got married. But anyhow, so I went with him to Saipan, where his home was and his job and his work in the Commonwealth and in the whole section. Anyhow, and it was kind of really early in the morning, and I had been awake for a while because I was really having trouble adjusting to living on an island in the middle of what seemed like nowhere. And I thought, when I woke up, at like 3 or 4 in the morning, I thought, am I really still in this world? Where am I? Where am I? And then, out the window, I saw Orion. And I had known the constellations since childhood, but had not seen all of them. But I saw Orion, and I noticed the belt and the arms and the legs, and I thought, I'm not in some weird world. I am still in the same world that God had blessed me with, Orion. Wow. So, as I looked out that window and saw those stars in the black sky, I realized that I had an epiphany. Epiphany. It was an experience, the constellation that I was familiar with, Orion, and I thought, I am still in God's world, and I am safe. Now, I shared this story with you because we all have epiphanies. When God shares light into our lives, we don't all recognize them, but they are there. I've come to learn this after many years of living. Magi, or wise ones, followed a star. And they follow a star that leads them to Joseph, Mary, and the baby Jesus. And they bring gifts. They want to go back and tell everyone else, even Herod, that they found him. They'd been looking and they found this child that was God incarnate. They found. But God would not let them do that. Kind of amazing. God sent them in a different direction on purpose. The lesson I learned from this story is to recognize that God is present in all of our lives. Even when we're feeling so lost and alone, God's presence is there. All we have to do is open the door or the window and look. But then I got to realize that the door that we really need to open is the door to our hearts. Too often, we keep that door shut, maybe even locked, thinking that we can shut out all the problems of the world. We can shut out the pain. We can shut out the problems. We can shut out the heartbreaks. And then we miss the gift that God has for us. God's love poured into us, in our hearts and in our lives. That is the story of Epiphany. That is what we can learn. But that is not enough. Even if we unlocked that door and allowed God's love to pour into our hearts, we can't lock that door and keep that all to ourselves, can we? After we receive God's love, we are called to share it. To share it with all whom we meet. Friends, relatives, people who have hurt us maybe even. We must share it especially with those who need it the most. The tired, the poor, the lonely, the homeless, those who are in prison, those who are in pain, those who are suffering. We need to share God's love with them. That is part of the Epiphany. To let God's love flow into us, but then through us, and let it flow out to others. I have learned that as I've gone through my life. I can remember in my life when I thought everything had to be up in your head, and I got straight A's in school and all that, but yet my life was a mess. And then I learned about God's love, and I learned about the reality of it. And I learned about how it comes in epiphanies. But we need to recognize and accept and then share. And now I would like to turn the microphone over to Samuel Cox, my beloved husband.
It's great to be with you and to share with you. First of all, I'd really like to acknowledge this church is one of the beacons of the community. And I'd like to express great gratitude for your support for the Beacon of Hope House that we've had the privilege for the last 5 years. We're going now a new beginning into our 6th year. So thank you very much. And also I was talking with Brian, how much you share with IHS, how many meals, thousands of meals you shared with the homeless. That is great. I want to share briefly my own spiritual beginning, and I think this is a time for reflection on all of us. It's a new beginning. I was what was called a depression baby. I think there's a lot of depression babies here in the 1930s, when there was no Social Security. There's widespread depression. People had no jobs. People were hungry. There was no welfare. My father was a pastor in northwest Arkansas for poor farmers. Usually they have about 5 acres, and they'd raise vegetables and chickens and hogs. And we had a one-room schoolhouse. And I remember one of the sermons my father often preached was the meanest person I ever met in my life. Something to think about. The meanest person you ever met. And he said it was his schoolmate when he was a little kid. And he was called Rusty because he never washed. He had a sort of a rusty color about him. He was so mean, picking on the other kids and pushing them down. He hated school, he hated teachers. And he said one day as he was walking to school, their wooden schoolroom, one-room schoolhouse, was burning. And it was Rusty that set fire to the school. Well, they sent Rusty off to reform school, and everybody forgot Rusty. And then many years later, my father said, they heard about this famous evangelist coming through. He's really charismatic, he's wonderful, everybody got to go hear him. And so all the people went to hear this famous evangelist. And guess what? It was Rusty. That was the lesson my father taught me many years ago. So if there's Rusties in your life, and we have some of them at the Beacon of Hope, and they can become beacons truly. And another thing I learned from my father is, the people had no money, so how was a pastor supposed to live? Well, they had what they call pounding, and they brought vegetables and even chickens with their legs tied to each other in the back of the room, and desserts, sometimes pies and so forth. When I was a little kid, I looked at that. I said, oh, wow, what are we going to have this week to eat? And then I was horrified when my father, and as he closed his service, said, if there's anyone hungry here, you take first. And people did. And they helped themselves. And then I got worried. Oh my gosh, they're going to take the best stuff. We won't have enough. The lesson I learned was there's always enough when we share. And that's the lesson I learned from my father. And thank you very much for your support. And God bless us all this New Year's for a new beginning. Yep.